The lawyer's pen tapped against my dining table like a small, patient metronome counting down the life I thought I'd earned. My son sat on the sofa with his head bowed, not because he was ashamed, but because he had learned the exact look grown men use when they want sympathy without having to feel it. Lena paced the length of my living room, as if it were a stage she'd practiced on. A tight smile she'd learned to wear when she wanted something. A man in a gray suit, clean shoes, clipped haircut, faint cologne, flipped through my papers like they were brochures he'd read a dozen times. "We're concerned about your decision-making," he said, voice soft and precise. "If necessary, we can petition for guardianship." The words were polite, clinical, the way a razor might be if it were wrapped in velvet. That was the moment something in me snapped, not into anger only, but into an unsoftened, clear kind of resolve. But that moment did not begin in my living room. It began on a Tuesday afternoon with a single phone call and 4 words I'd never forget. "Mom," I said casually, the way a woman who has raised a child 1,000 times greets a son. "When's the wedding? Have you picked a date?" I pictured the little calendar in my mind, the pale pink dress I'd bought, the shoes still in their box in my closet, and I smiled before I knew why. Lena answered the phone, and the smile in her voice was the sort of carefully practiced thing I'd mistaken for affection many times before. "We got married yesterday," she said, almost cheerfully. "We only invited special people. Special people." The phrase landed like a cold hand on my shoulder. For 3 years I had been steady, like a light left on. I had covered rent when their checks bounced, paid the repair bills for an air conditioner that groaned in tenements unknown to my younger self, filled a refrigerator that otherwise hummed with the chill of scarcity. I had written checks late at night, canceled plans, and dug into the money my husband and I had saved for quiet travels and easy afternoons. I had thought every deposit, every small act of service was a thread binding me to them. Special people. I looked at the pale pink dress hanging in my closet like an accusation. I had spent $200 on that dress. $200 I had set aside and promised myself would buy me a place in the wedding photographs, a memory I would keep in the little chest of my life. I had planned what I would say at the toast. I'd counted the dollars for a wedding gift. 1,000, because that was what grandparents did, even when they had no grandchildren. I had called my sister Diana in Chicago and told her to save the date. I had scrubbed my house until the floor shone because I imagined them stepping over the threshold and telling me that everything had gone well. Instead, the threshold had been their choice to cross without me. Max's voice came then, thin and practiced. "Mom," he said, as if he were reading a line that had been given to him, so he would not have to feel. It was intimate, very small, just the 2 of us and the witnesses. Intimate. The word was an attempt at a curtain drawn over something larger. I didn't believe it. Within hours, I saw pictures. Lena's face in white, her parents proud and arm around arm, siblings with champagne, tables with more than 2 glasses. I saw the dress I'd helped finance, money. I'd sent for personal expenses, and in a 2-second scroll, I saw what they thought of me. Invisible enough to be erased. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried, but not from sorrow only. The tears were hot and jagged, threaded with a kind of anger I had kept under the surface for years. I cried for every time I had skipped a doctor's visit to wire money for a gas bill. I cried for the dinners eaten cold because I'd sent the check for the car instead. I cried for the woman I had become. Generous to the point of being depleted, always available, quietly complicit in a relationship that had been traded on terms I did not set. Morning brought a steadier kind of grief, the kind where you put coffee on, sit at a familiar kitchen table, and make the necessary calculations. I opened my checkbook and bank statements like someone reading a ledger that had been written in invisible ink. I went line by line, number by number, because when you have been used as a bank, the numbers tell the truth that the love did not. Rent, $500 per month x 36 months. Calculate 500x36 01800, $18,000. Groceries and household supplies, $200 per month x 36 months. Calculate 20036 or 7200, $7,200. Gifts for birthdays, Christmases, anniversaries, estimate of $3,000, $3,000. Medical and emergency expenses for Lena. $800. The car loan I helped with. $2,500. Air conditioner repair. $600. Living room furniture I bought when they moved in. $1,200. $200. Now add them carefully. One line at a time. 18,000 plus 7,200 over 25. 200. 25,200 plus 3,000. 28. 200. 2,000 plus 800 2 000. 29,000 plus 2,500 year 31. 500. 3,000 plus 600 or 32 on 00. 32,500 plus and 200 5 33 true 0. The final total, $33,300. $33,300 from the savings my husband and I had set aside, penny by patient penny, for the quiet years we'd imagined. $33,300 that had paid for two people's comfort while I watched myself become a line item. Numbers have a way of making grief practical. Once I'd seen the total, something in me stopped being liquid. I called Mr. Klein at my bank, the man who had always smiled and greeted me by name behind the teller's glass, and told him to cancel the automatic transfers. He asked if I was being pressured. His voice carried concern. In 3 minutes, his concern felt more parental than the messages I'd received from my son in years. "Are you sure, Mrs. Clara?" he said gently. "These transfers—" "Yes," I answered. The single syllable felt like a verdict. He walked me through closing access, changing passwords, and setting up protection so no one else could touch my accounts. The world felt quieter when I walked out of the bank. I had put a small, clean fence between what was mine and what had been taking me. I took a walk that afternoon for pleasure. Not to the bank, not to the supermarket, not to the pharmacy, just to feel my feet on the pavement for no reason but that I could. I passed the park where I'd pushed Max on the swings until his legs were tired, and we'd both laughed until our sides hurt. I thought about how, somewhere between those swings and the sofa where he practiced not looking at me, things had shifted. I thought of the pottery class I'd registered for years ago, and then canceled, because they might need me. For too long, I'd let my calendar be dictated by their emergencies. When I came home, there were 3 cars outside my house. The sight of them made my stomach clench. A reptile fear that comes from a place that knows it has given away its keys. I had years ago handed them keys because trust felt like the kind thing to do. Now I stood watching through the curtains at a living room that had the sofa I'd chosen, and shadows moving where laughter used to be. I opened the door. They were already inside, Max on the sofa with his elbows in his knees, head bent like a boy awaiting a scolding. Lena pacing with that tight energy people have when they want to make a crisis look urgent. A man at my dining table rifled through my papers as if they were instruction manuals he had the right to read. "Mrs. Clara," he said, standing and extending a hand that I did not take. "Dr. Fisher, I'm with a family law practice. We're concerned about your ability to manage your affairs." His manners were immaculate. His news was betrayal dressed up as concern. They told me they'd spoken to someone at the bank, that the cancellations had been noticed. I listened while Max's voice floated across the room, practiced and flat. "Mom, we're worried. We think you might be confused." Confused. The word sounded soft, like a hand on a shoulder, but it was a hand built to take my car keys and then the house keys too. The lawyer placed a folder on my table and spoke of predicates and petitions and how a judge could order a conservatorship if someone's decisions were judged to be impaired. The clinical language tried to make a takeover feel like a public service. I felt the air leave the room like the slow exhale of a house waiting for the storm to pass. "You have no right to go through my papers," I said. I walked to the table and gathered every piece of paper he had touched and slid them into a folder in my hands. "This is my private information." The lawyer's smile did not falter. "We can help facilitate the transition," he said, as if it were my transition he hoped to plan like a retirement party. He offered a power of attorney and murmured that this was sometimes kinder than having the courts step in. To him and to them, kindness meant control. I made a decision in a way I had not made decisions in years. Maybe the years of being used had sanded my edges smooth, but not off. They only hid the grit underneath. "You will leave my house," I told them. My voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. It surprised them too. Lena's face twisted first into a wounded look, and then sharpened into something like anger. "We were counting on you," she cried. "We made plans, mortgage payments, credit, based on your support." That was the confounding thing about being the benefactor. Every promise they made was thinly anchored to my dollars. Without me, their plans would wobble. Max's version of concern edged into threat. "This will end badly for you," he said. He imagined me alone and helpless, a future of decline they'd stage somewhere between pity and processing. "You're going to be on your own," he warned, as if scarcity were a mercy they'd previously spared me from. I looked at him, at the man who used to bury his face in my shoulder after a nightmare, and I felt a grief that had been building for years. "I have been alone for a long time," I said quietly. "The difference now is that I'm choosing it." When they left, the lawyer collected his things and thanked me for my time with the kind of politeness that removes consequences from conversation. The house felt both vast and close, an odd echoing of the life I had chosen to share. I locked the door and sat with the silence, and for the first time in years it felt like space rather than absence. That night I lay awake and planned with the steady concentration of someone learning a new language. If they intended a war, they would have one, but I would not meet it with tears and checks. I would meet it with papers and counsel. In the morning I went to see Mr. Weber, an attorney I had met years before when I had handled my husband's will. He was different from Dr. Fisher. Where Fisher smelled of practice, Weber smelled of books and a quiet that suggested he had time for people who needed protection. He listened without interruption as I told him everything. The wedding that had not included me, the phone calls that came only for money, the man riffling through my documents. He did not laugh at the word conservatorship. Instead, he said, "This is elder financial abuse, more common than most people think. We'll document everything, every transfer, every favor, every text." He showed me a path. Change locks, install cameras, move the accounts to a new bank with protections, and file a new will that reflected my wishes. He promised to draft letters that would make clear I was of sound mind and refusing assistance because I chose so, not because I could not choose. We spent hours combing through my statements. When he saw the total, $33,300, he whistled quietly, not out of surprise but out of recognition. "Mrs. Clara," he said, "with this money, you could have enjoyed a modest retirement, traveled and lived comfortably. Instead, you became an open checkbook." He did not blame me for my generosity. He respected it. But he also respected that generosity enough to help me stop the leak. I changed the locks the next morning. The locksmith, a young man named Ethan, who also installed security systems, recommended a camera on the porch and a keypad that would track entries. "We'll set it up so only you and people you choose can come in," he said. I told him the price was not the point. The point was my peace. While he worked, my phone buzzed with an unknown number, Lena, calling from someone else's phone, the voice trying to sound small and reasonable. "Clara," she said, "we made a mistake. Can we talk? Maybe have dinner. We want to celebrate with you." Her words were a mixture of contrition and calculation. I asked her plainly, "How much do you owe in rent?" The hesitation on the line told me what the photographs had already told. They relied on me the way a plant relies on a window. She muttered a number, $1,000, and then admitted with a startling honesty, "We need your help." "Do you miss me or my money?" I asked, and the silence that followed answered me before she did. She said, "Both." I hung up. I did things that day for myself. I went to a beauty salon I had canceled appointments with for years, because someone else needed me more. I let the stylist, Cynthia, cut my hair and color it and fuss over me, and she said something I will never forget. "You look like someone who just remembered she's allowed to be seen." The neighbor I'd barely spoken to before, Eleanor, who lived next door, stopped by that afternoon with a basket of lemons and an offer of companionship. She had heard the voices and wanted to know if I was all right. Somehow, a stranger's concern felt steadier than the calls I had just cut off. That night, I lay in bed with the house quiet, listening to the soft tick of the new lock as if it were a heartbeat. I had begun to map a future that included myself, first for a change, and the feeling was strange and bravely foreign. But storms do not end with a single lock change. When you decide to take your life back, people who were accustomed to your availability notice. They do not always leave quietly. A knock came at the door late that night. My heart gave a small, involuntary jump. I moved to the window and saw the shadow of a figure I did not immediately recognize. The porch light glowed a pale pool across the steps. I padded to the door, the memory of the lawyer's pen like a small drum in my ear. When I opened it, I saw headlights and a man holding a folder. He smiled the polite smile of people who deliver evening messages. "I'm from Mr. Weber's office," he said. "He asked me to bring this over." Inside the folder, I could see papers and my throat tightened. I had thought I was ready, but a new kind of test had just arrived, and I hadn't yet learned all the rules. If you're still with me, please like this video and subscribe. This story doesn't end here. In the next part, I'll tell you about the plan we made with Mr. Weber, the evidence we gathered, and the first cold thing Lena and Max tried after I changed the locks. For now, the porch light hummed, the papers waited, and I realized that choosing myself was the first step in a long, complicated reckoning. The courthouse clock struck 9 the next morning, its chime echoing through the marble halls like a countdown to judgment. Clara sat stiffly in her chair at the plaintiff's table, her fingers gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles were pale. Beside her, her lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, shuffled papers with a calm assurance that steadied her frayed nerves. She wanted to believe in his confidence, but the hollow pit in her stomach told another story. Lena and Max swept into the courtroom a few minutes later, hand in hand, dressed in expensive suits that screamed arrogance. They didn't look like a couple on trial for betrayal. They looked like they were there to collect a prize. Max's smirk widened when his eyes met Clara's, as though daring her to crumble under the weight of his new allegiance. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver hair pulled back into a tight bun, entered, and the room rose. Clara stood too, her knees wobbling slightly. She whispered a silent prayer. "Lord, help me find the strength to face this storm." When everyone was seated, the case began. Mr. Reynolds rose first, his voice firm and clear as he outlined the decades Clara had poured into her family, the sacrifices she had made, the promises Max had broken. He painted a picture not of a bitter ex-wife seeking vengeance, but of a woman robbed of her dignity and her rightful share of what she had built. Clara's eyes welled as he spoke, not from weakness, but from the validation of hearing her pain laid bare for all to see. For so long, Max had dismissed her voice. Now it was undeniable. Then came Lena's attorney, a slick-tongued man named Mr. Harkins. His words dripped with venom cloaked in courtesy. He portrayed Clara as a scorned, jealous woman, clinging desperately to wealth and attention that no longer belonged to her. "Mrs. Clara Thompson," he said, pacing before the jury, "cannot let go. This case is not about justice. It is about spite." Clara's heart pounded. She wanted to leap up, to shout that it wasn't true, that Lena had stolen not just her husband but her peace. But she remained seated, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her breathing steady. Mr. Reynolds placed a reassuring hand on her arm, silently reminding her that truth had its own power. The first witness was called. It was Clara's longtime friend and neighbor, Martha. A sturdy woman with a kind face, Martha testified about the nights she had seen Clara crying on her porch, the whispers around town about Max and Lena long before the affair was admitted. "She gave that man everything," Martha told the courtroom, her voice trembling. "And he threw her away like she was nothing." Clara bowed her head, grateful for Martha's loyalty. But when Harkins cross-examined, he sneered, "And isn't it true, Mrs. Jenkins, that you never actually saw Mr. Thompson and Ms. Lena together romantically until after the separation?" Martha faltered. "Well, not directly, but no further questions." Harkins cut her off, smirking at the jury as though he had dismantled her credibility with a single strike. Clara's chest tightened. She felt the ground shifting beneath her. During a recess, Clara stepped into the hallway, needing air. She leaned against the cold wall, closing her eyes. That's when she heard them, Lena and Max's voices, low but venomous, coming from around the corner. "She looks pathetic up there," Lena whispered with a laugh. "I almost feel sorry for her." "Don't," Max replied, his tone icy. "She's the reason we're stuck in this mess. Once this is over, she'll be nothing. We'll have everything." Clara's stomach dropped. Tears threatened, but she swallowed them back. She would not let them see her broken. She turned on her heel and walked back into the courtroom with her chin lifted, though her insides quaked. The afternoon brought her turn on the stand. Her heart raced as she raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. She settled into the witness chair, the eyes of the jury heavy on her. Mr. Reynolds approached gently. "Clara, could you tell the court about your marriage to Max?" She nodded, her voice trembling at first. "We met when we were young. I believed he was my forever. For 30 years, I cooked, cleaned, and supported him through everything. I stood by his side when we had nothing, and when he built his business, I was there, raising our children, keeping our home strong." Her voice grew firmer as she continued. "I never imagined the man I trusted would betray me with someone I considered family. Lena was like a daughter to me. She sat at my table, ate my food, listened to my stories, and all the while she was taking what was mine." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Clara's chest heaved with emotion, but she refused to break. Then came Harkin's turn. He approached with a sly smile. "Mrs. Thompson, isn't it true that your marriage was already failing before Mr. Thompson met Lena?" "No," Clara said firmly. "We had challenges like any marriage, but I was committed. He chose to betray me." Harkins leaned closer, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Or perhaps he chose to find love where he could no longer find it with you." Gasps echoed from the gallery. Clara's face burned, her fists clenching in her lap. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but she forced her voice to remain steady. Love built on lies is no love at all. The jury's eyes were fixed on her, some nodding subtly. When the session ended for the day, Clara returned home exhausted. She sank onto her couch, staring at the empty walls. Memories flooded her. Birthdays celebrated, anniversaries cherished. The life she had built brick by brick, now reduced to exhibits in a courtroom. The phone rang. It was her son, David. "Mom, I saw the reports," he said gently. "You were incredible today. I'm proud of you." Her throat tightened. "Thank you, David. I don't know how much more of this I can take." "You can take it," he insisted. "You've always been stronger than you think. And no matter what happens, we're with you." His words wrapped around her like a blanket, soothing the raw edges of her spirit. But that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, doubt crept in. What if the jury believed Lena and Max's lies? What if she walked away with nothing? Could she survive that kind of defeat? Sleep came fitfully, and with it, dreams of betrayal. She saw Lena laughing at her, Max turning his back, the courtroom crumbling around her as she screamed for justice. She awoke in a cold sweat, her heart racing. The next day in court, Lena took the stand. She sat primly, her eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "I never meant to hurt Clara," she sniffled, dabbing at her cheek with a tissue. "But Max and we just fell in love. You can't choose who you love." Clara's nails dug into her palms. The audacity of it made her blood boil. Harkins asked, "And did Clara ever mistreat you?" Lena hesitated, then nodded. She was controlling. She always criticized me, made me feel small. Max was the only one who truly saw me." Clara gasped, her whole body trembling. Lies. Every word a lie. She wanted to leap up, to shout the truth, but Mr. Reynolds whispered, "Patience." The jury sees through her, but Clara wasn't sure. The jurors' faces were unreadable, their eyes shifting from Lena's tears to Clara's clenched fists. When court adjourned, Clara left quickly, her chest heavy. On the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, questions hurled. "Clara, do you regret bringing this case? Clara, is it true you were abusive? Clara, how do you respond to Lena's testimony?" She pushed through them, her head down, until she reached her car. She collapsed inside, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She thought of driving home, but instead she found herself heading toward the little chapel on the edge of town. She slipped into a pew, the stained glass casting soft colors across her weary face. She bowed her head and whispered, "God, I don't know how to fight this anymore. Please, give me strength." The silence that followed was heavy, but in it she felt a flicker of peace. A reminder that she was not alone, and just as she began to breathe easier, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit the screen. It read, "You think you're winning, but you have no idea what's coming next." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Her hand trembled as she reread the message. Who had sent it? Lena, Max, someone else entirely? Her world, already shaken, tilted further into chaos, and deep down she knew the real storm was only beginning. The chapel lights flickered above Clara as she stared at the text glowing on her phone. Her chest tightened, a cold dread wrapping around her ribs like a vice. The message was short, but the threat lingered in every syllable. You think you're winning, but you have no idea what's coming next. She clutched the phone to her chest, whispering, "Lord, what do they plan to do to me?" The next morning, Clara walked into the courtroom with a heaviness that no amount of prayer had erased. Her lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, noticed the shadows under her eyes. "Did you sleep?" he asked quietly as they sat. She shook her head. "No, and I got a message last night. Someone warned me." She slid her phone toward him, showing the text. Mr. Reynolds' jaw tightened. "This is intimidation. I'll bring it up to the judge if it continues." But Clara knew better. The courtroom was Lena and Max's stage. They would stop at nothing to twist the narrative. The proceedings began. This time Max took the stand. Clara's stomach churned as she watched him place his hand on the Bible, the same hand that had once held hers during Sunday service, the same lips that had whispered vows of forever. "Mr. Thompson," Harkins began smoothly, "tell the court about your marriage to Clara." Max sighed heavily, as though the weight of 30 years rested solely on his shoulders. "Clara and we grew apart. She was always critical, always unhappy. I tried to make it work, but nothing I did was enough. Lena didn't steal me away. She saved me." Clara's breath caught. Saved him? From what? From loyalty? From the woman who had raised his children, cooked his meals, mended his shirts, and carried his burdens for 3 decades? Rage clawed at her throat. Harkins pressed further. "Did Clara ever mistreat you, Max?" Max lowered his gaze, his voice breaking with practiced sorrow. She belittled me, made me feel like less of a man. With Lena, I finally felt respected. Loved." The courtroom murmured, whispers rippling through the gallery. Clara felt her face burn. Lies. All of it lies. But in that moment, she saw some jurors shift uncomfortably, doubt flickering in their eyes. When Mr. Reynolds cross-examined, his tone was sharp. "Mr. Thompson, can you provide a single witness, a single piece of evidence to support these claims of mistreatment?" Max faltered. "Well, it was private. You wouldn't understand." Mr. Reynolds' voice boomed. "So we are to take your word alone, a man who abandoned his wife for another woman, who now stands to gain financially by destroying her reputation?" The courtroom grew still. Clara held her breath, praying the jurors were listening, truly listening. During recess, Clara stepped into the hallway again, needing to steady her heart. That's when Martha appeared, her loyal neighbor and friend. "Don't let him shake you, Clara," Martha whispered, gripping her hand. "The truth has a way of shining through lies." Clara nodded weakly. "I just hope it shines soon." That night at home, Clara sat at her kitchen table, staring at the silence around her. She picked up a framed photo of her and Max from years ago, smiling on a beach vacation, their children building sandcastles nearby. Her throat tightened. She wanted to smash the frame against the wall, but instead she set it down gently. The woman in that photo didn't deserve to be erased. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. Another text, from the same unknown number. "Drop the case or you'll regret it." Her blood ran cold. Hands trembling, she forwarded the message to Mr. Reynolds. He called immediately. "Clara, this is serious. They're trying to scare you into giving up, but if you walk away now, they win." "I'm scared," Clara whispered, "but I can't let them take the rest of me, not without a fight." The next day in court, Lena was recalled to the stand for cross-examination. This time, Mr. Reynolds was relentless. "Ms. Lena, you claim Clara was controlling. Yet wasn't it Clara who welcomed you into her home, fed you at her table, treated you like family?" Lena squirmed. She did, but it was out of obligation, not kindness." Reynolds pressed. "Obligation? Or generosity? Did she not give you a place to stay when you had nowhere else to go?" Lena's lips tightened, her eyes darting toward Max. For the first time, her polished mask cracked. Clara watched, hope flickering in her chest. Maybe the truth was finally pushing through. But then, Harkins jumped in with an objection, redirecting the narrative. "This case isn't about kindness, Your Honor. It's about financial entitlement." The judge allowed the redirection, and just like that, the tide shifted again. That evening, Clara sat with David at her dining table, the weight of the day pressing on her shoulders. David's jaw clenched as he read the threatening texts. "Mom, this isn't just a divorce case anymore. This is harassment. Maybe even blackmail." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "What do I do?" "You stand your ground," David said firmly. "If you give up, they'll keep taking until there's nothing left of you." His words gave her strength, but fear lingered in the corners of her heart. The following week, a bombshell arrived in court. Harkins presented documents, bank statements, supposedly showing Clara had siphoned money from Max's business without his knowledge. Clara's eyes widened. "That's not true," she cried, her voice breaking across the courtroom. The judge banged the gavel. "Order!" But the damage was done. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances. Clara's pulse raced. She turned to Mr. Reynolds. "What is this?" "I never touched his accounts," Reynolds whispered. "These look fabricated. We'll expose them." Lena and Max sat smugly, hands entwined, as though they had already won. At night, Clara lay awake, every nerve on fire. How far would they go? How many lies would they spin before the truth drowned under their fabrications? She drifted into restless dreams again. But this time they weren't dreams. At 2 a.m., a crash jolted her awake. Heart hammering, she crept to the living room, where a brick lay shattered among glass on the floor. Tied to it was a note scrawled in harsh letters. "Last warning. Quit now." Clara's hands shook violently as she clutched the note. Her world spun. This wasn't just about court anymore. This was war. She dialed David with trembling fingers. "They came to the house," she whispered, tears streaming. "They broke the window. They left a note." "I'm coming over," David said, his voice tight with fury. "You're not staying there alone." Within 20 minutes, David was at her side, sweeping up the glass, holding her shoulders as she sobbed. "They can threaten, they can lie, but they can't destroy who you are, Mom. Don't let them." But Clara knew the line had been crossed. This fight was no longer confined to a courtroom. The darkness was spilling into her home, her sanctuary. And as she stared at the broken window, cold air rushing in, she realized one terrifying truth. If Lena and Max were willing to go this far, what would they do next? The morning after the brick shattered through Clara's window, the air inside her home still smelled of broken glass and fear. Clara sat at her kitchen table, the note spread before her like a wound she couldn't stitch closed. David hovered nearby, pacing back and forth. "We're calling the police," he said firmly, dialing before Clara could object. The officer who arrived took photographs of the shattered window and the threatening note. "Looks like intimidation," he muttered. "Could be linked to your court case." Clara's hands twisted in her lap. Linked? She had no doubt. Lena and Max's smug faces floated in her mind. They wanted her silenced. After the officer left, David placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "You're moving in with me until this is over. I won't have you sitting here alone, waiting for the next attack." Clara hesitated. This house was her sanctuary, the place where her children had grown up. Leaving it felt like letting Lena and Max steal yet another piece of her life. But as she looked at the shattered glass, she knew David was right. That night, she packed a suitcase. With every folded shirt, every tucked-away photo, anger simmered. "They've taken enough. They will not take my spirit." The next day in court, The atmosphere was thicker than ever. Word of the break-in had spread. Whispers buzzed in the gallery. But Lena and Max sat unfazed, as if the chaos outside these walls had nothing to do with them. Mr. Reynolds requested additional security measures for Clara, citing harassment and intimidation. The judge listened, her brows knitting, but allowed the trial to proceed. Clara sat taller in her seat, her resolve sharpening. If Lena and Max thought fear would drive her away, they had underestimated her. The trial entered its most brutal phase, financial evidence. Boxes of documents were wheeled in, papers stacked high. Mr. Reynolds presented receipts, records of Clara's unpaid labor, the decades of support she had poured into Max's business. Without Mrs. Thompson's unpaid contributions, he argued, there would be no empire to divide today. But Harkins struck back hard. He waved fabricated bank statements, insisting Clara had secretly siphoned funds. This is a woman grasping at straws, he told the jury. She's not a victim. She's a manipulator. Clara's stomach knotted. Each lie was another stone hurled at her integrity. She clenched her fists beneath the table, nails biting into her palms. When court adjourned that evening, Clara walked toward the parking lot, exhaustion dragging at her limbs. But then, footsteps behind her. She turned sharply. A man in a dark hoodie melted into the shadows. Clara's pulse spiked. She hurried to her car, locking the doors quickly. Her hands shook so violently she struggled to fit the key into the ignition. That night, sleep refused her. At David's house, she sat in the guest room, staring at the moonlight spilling through the curtains. Her mind replayed every betrayal, every threat, every lie. She whispered into the silence. God, why are they trying to destroy me? What more could they want? The following morning, David placed a folder on the table before her. Mom, I did some digging. Clara looked up, startled. Digging? Yes. I called an old friend who works in finance. Those bank statements they presented, they're sloppy fakes. The account numbers don't match. The dates are off. If Reynolds can get an expert to testify, we can expose their whole scheme. Clara's eyes widened. Hope, faint but bright, flickered in her chest. Are you sure? David nodded. Positive. They've overplayed their hand. In court that afternoon, Mr. Reynolds called the expert David had found. With calm precision, the man dismantled Harkins's so-called evidence. These documents are fraudulent, he declared. Clearly fabricated. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge's face hardened. Harkins tried to object, but the tide had turned. For the first time, Clara saw Lena and Max's confidence crack. Lena whispered furiously to Max, her lips pressed tight. Max's jaw clenched, his smirk gone. Clara sat straighter, warmth spreading in her chest. The truth is finding its way out, but victory was not yet hers. That evening another text arrived. This one made her blood freeze. If you don't stop, someone you love will pay the price. Clara dropped the phone, horror spreading through her. Her children, her grandchildren. The threat wasn't aimed at her anymore. It was aimed at them. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the phone. She wanted to crumble, to run from this nightmare, but then David's words echoed in her mind. If you give up, they'll keep taking until there's nothing left of you. Clara wiped her tears, her jaw setting firm. If protecting her family meant standing in the fire, she would. The next day in court, she took the stand once more. This time, her voice did not tremble. For years I let myself believe I was powerless, she said, meeting the jury's eyes one by one. But no one can take your worth unless you hand it to them. I will not hand mine to Max and Lena. Not today. Not ever. Her words hung in the air, powerful and raw. Even the judge seemed moved. But as Clara stepped down, her gaze met Lena's. For a fleeting moment, Lena's mask slipped, and what Clara saw there was not just arrogance. It was fear. That night, as Clara lay in David's guest room, she turned the threat over and over in her mind. Who had sent the texts? Lena, Max, or someone working on their behalf? And then, a darker question gnawed at her heart. If Lena was afraid, what was she hiding? The answer, Clara knew, would change everything. The threat on Clara's phone haunted her dreams. Shadows seemed to crawl through the corners of David's house. Whispers chased her in the silence of the night. Yet when morning came, she rose with renewed determination. "This ends now," Clara told David over breakfast. He searched her face. "Mom, are you ready for what that might mean?" Clara nodded. "I've lived too many years afraid of losing love. I won't spend the rest of my life afraid of losing myself." The next day, court resumed. Lena sat stiff and pale beside Max, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mr. Reynolds leaned toward Clara. "Watch her," he whispered. "Something's cracking." The proceedings began with more witness testimony. Neighbors described Clara's constant sacrifices, paying rent, buying furniture, covering emergencies. Each account painted a picture of devotion repaid with greed. But it was when Mr. Reynolds requested Lena to take the stand again that the air shifted. "Mrs. Thompson," he began smoothly, "earlier you testified that Clara excluded herself from family events. Is that correct?" "Yes," Lena replied, her voice steady but her eyes darting. "Then how do you explain these photographs?" Reynolds held up enlarged images, wedding pictures, pulled from social media, with Lena's family smiling beside her and Max. Clara's absence was undeniable. The gallery buzzed. Lena flushed. It was a small ceremony. We didn't have space for everyone. Yet you had space for your parents, siblings, cousins, and even distant relatives, Reynolds pressed. "But not the woman who financed your life?" Lena's lips parted, but no sound came. "And isn't it true," Reynolds continued, his voice cutting like glass, "that Clara gave you over $800 for a dress, the very dress you're wearing in these photos, while being told she was not special enough to attend?" Lena's composure shattered. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but not the soft kind Clara had once believed. These were tears of exposure, of being cornered. Max shifted uncomfortably, whispering harshly into Lena's ear. But she shook her head. For the first time, Lena looked truly afraid. That night, Clara could not rest. She replayed Lena's fear over and over in her mind. Fear not of losing the case, but of something deeper. 2 nights later, the answer arrived in a knock at David's door. When Clara opened it, Lena stood there alone, eyes swollen, face pale. "Please," Lena whispered, "I need to talk to you. Just you." David started forward, but Clara held up a hand. "It's all right. Let her in." In the dim light of the living room, Lena broke. "They made me do it," she sobbed, sinking onto the couch. "Max and his lawyer. The lies, the fake documents, the threats. I didn't want any of it, but I was trapped." Clara's chest tightened. "Trapped? By what?" Lena buried her face in her hands. "Debt. Before I married Max, I owed money. Bad money. People who don't forgive. He promised if I stayed quiet, if I helped him, he'd protect me. But now they're after me too. That's why I sent the texts. Not to you, but to scare Max into paying them. But he twisted it, used it against you." The room spun. Clara clutched the armrest. "So the threats? They weren't just empty?" Lena shook her head. "No. They'll come for all of us if Max doesn't pay." Clara's mind reeled. Her son, her flesh and blood, not only used her money but dragged them all into danger with it. And Lena, for all her cruelty, was now unraveling before her like a cornered child. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked quietly. "Because I can't carry it anymore," Lena whispered. "And because if I don't, you'll never be safe." The next day in court, Lena's demeanor was transformed. Called again to testify, she trembled, then blurted out the truth. "The documents. They're fake. Mr. Harkins helped us forge them. Max told me to say Clara was incompetent. I went along because I was afraid, but she never deserved this." Gasps erupted in the courtroom. The judge struck her gavel sharply. "Order!" Max leapt to his feet. "Lena, shut up!" he roared, his face purple with rage. But Lena didn't stop. Years of pressure poured out of her in a flood of confession. Max used his mother for money. All of us did. And when she finally said no, he wanted to destroy her to keep control. I thought I was protecting myself, but I see now. I was destroying her. Clara sat frozen, a storm of emotions tearing through her. Vindication, grief, fury, relief. The judge's eyes narrowed at Max. "Mr. Thompson, these are serious allegations. Until they are investigated, this court cannot proceed as if your claims hold merit." Mr. Reynolds seized the moment. "Your Honor, I request immediate dismissal of the guardianship petition and criminal investigation into fraudulent evidence." The gavel fell. "So ordered." The days that followed were a blur. Police raided Harkin's office. Evidence of forgery and financial misconduct piled up. Max was questioned, his smugness finally stripped away. Clara, though vindicated, felt no triumph. When she saw her son in handcuffs outside the courthouse, her heart broke anew. He was still her child, no matter the damage he had done. But then she remembered the years of silence, the missing wedding invitation, the shattered glass on her kitchen floor. She straightened her spine. Love did not mean surrender. Lena, meanwhile, avoided charges by cooperating fully. She left Max, returning to her parents' home. Before she left town, she visited Clara one last time. "I don't expect forgiveness," Lena said softly, her eyes red-rimmed. "But thank you for listening that night. You gave me courage." Clara studied her for a long moment. "Courage without truth is useless, Lena. Remember that." Weeks later, Clara stood in her newly repaired home. Fresh locks on the doors, cameras installed, windows gleaming. For the first time in years, it truly felt like hers. David joined her at the kitchen table, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "It's quiet here again," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "Yes, but it's a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of being ignored, but the peace of being free." David reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom." Clara's eyes softened. "I'm proud of me, too." That evening, she walked through the park where she had once taken Max as a boy. The golden light of sunset painted the sky. She watched young families laughing, children chasing one another, life moving forward. And she realized something profound. She had been afraid of ending up alone, but what she had really been was lonely in the wrong company. Now she wasn't alone. She had David, she had new neighbors, she had herself. Months later, Clara hosted a small gathering at her home. Neighbors, church friends, David, and even Eleanor from next door filled the rooms with laughter. There were no manipulative phone calls, no guilt-laden pleas, no poisonous words about special people, only warmth, genuine smiles, and the clinking of coffee cups. Clara looked around, tears pricking her eyes, not from sorrow, but gratitude. For so long, she had measured her worth by the scraps of love she received from those who drained her. Now she understood, worth is not given. It is claimed, and she had claimed hers. As the evening wound down, Clara stepped out onto her porch, breathing in the cool night air. She tilted her head toward the stars and whispered, "I did it. Henry, I finally did it." Somewhere deep inside, she felt her late husband's presence. Proud and steady. Clara Richter, once invisible in her own family, had finally found her voice, and she would never let it be silenced again.